long ball is going to go for a touchdown. The game's over. Webster Slaughter.
Metcalf will go for the score. Unbelievable.
45-40. Run, William, run. He's got blockers in front. 5. Touchdown. Joshua Cribbs turns disaster into a score.
Sight wants it all on this one for Logan, and he is there.
Jim Brown to the 30. Jim Brown is going to go in for another touchdown.
The Cleveland Browns select Baker Mayfield.
Wow. It is Baker Mayfield.
Hello, Cleveland. Welcome to episode number 69 of the 1085 Gridiron Podcast. I am your host, Joki. Jack McCurry will be joining us in a little bit during both of our interviews. I said 2 interviews. Today we have Mark Schofield of Inside the Pylon, and also the host of the Locked On Patriots Podcast. And also joining us will be Michael Kist of Bleeding Green SB Nation. He's the host of the Bleeding Green Radio Podcast, and he will be joining us to talk the NFC East. And then Mark, as I mentioned before, he's the host of Locked On Patriots, so we decided to get him in here, and he's going to be breaking down the AFC East for us. So we're covering both the AFC East and the NFC East in this podcast. What we wanted to do for you to get ready for the NFL season is to break down pretty much every single team in the NFL, and we decided to do that by division. So today, as I mentioned, we're going to be doing the AFC East and the NFC East. And without further ado, let's jump right into the interview with Mark Schofield of Inside the Pylon. All right, it is our pleasure to be joined once again by Mark Schofield. He is with Inside the Pylon. He also hosts the Locked On Patriots podcast. How are you doing today, Mark?
Gentlemen, I am doing fantastic. It's great to be back with you, and it's great to be so close to football now. I mean, we've got actual college games going on right now. We've had a pretty decent weekend of college football. We've got NFL stuff coming. Obviously the Eagles are going to be raising the banner on Thursday night, so it's good to finally get through this summer when, like at Locked On Patriots, I was talking about football movies and losing my mind. So it's good to be back talking about actual football again.
Yeah, it has been a long summer for us here in Cleveland. The Cavs did lose the championship. LeBron's gone. At least we've had the Indians to take our minds off of things. But, football season is what the city lives and dies for. So Brown season's right around the corner. Ohio State started yesterday with a nice win. I don't know about you, but in our area, high school football is huge. So I guess that was the start of football for us is the high school season.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, back up because I'm from the Boston area, and college football isn't that big because you've got really small schools. I mean, BC, UMass, nobody really gets on those bandwagons. So you've got a lot of the smaller schools. So high school football, at least when I left, was still pretty big, but nothing like what it is out with Ohio high school football. I mean, I remember driving through Ohio this summer on a trip back and forth to Chicago and stopping at a couple of towns and seeing some of these high school stadiums, and they're like, wow, my college stadium wasn't this big. So,
well, they're nothing as good as the stadiums down in Texas, but I would say that there's some good ones here in Ohio. That's for sure. You are with Locked On Patriots, so we wanted to get you in here to talk the AFC East. And what is your overall opinion of this division? How strong is it going to be? I would imagine the Patriots are going to be at the top. Then you'll have the Bills, the Jets, and the Dolphins fighting for those 2, 3, and 4 spots. What's your overall viewpoint on this division?
I mean, you look around any sort of, preseason prediction article, podcast, show, wherever, I think it's pretty much, conventional wisdom at this point that the AFC East is the worst division in all of football. I mean, when you look at the overall landscape of this division, obviously the Patriots have had their way with this division, during the Brady and Belichick era. I mean, I think it's just 1 or maybe 2 times, if I'm mistaken, that they haven't won this division. Something like, 9, 10 times in a row they've won the division. And when you remember that you're dealing with 3 other teams, 2 of whom are probably starting a rookie quarterback during week 1. The third, Miami, they're bringing back Ryan Tannehill, who's coming off of a season lost due to injury. And you can see why people look at this division and say, look, it's the worst division in football. Now, that being said, there's still some interesting storylines. There's still some talented players in this division. And it might be a year or two away from being a hyper-competitive division because, if Darnold and Allen pan out, then those teams are going to have good young quarterbacks. And as we've seen, given what teams like Chicago and the Rams are doing, you get a young quarterback on his rookie deal that's competitive and capable. You can then address other needs. You can throw tons of money at big-time free agents. You can make trades and really stock your roster and make that team competitive and take advantage of that time on the rookie deal. And so this might be a very competitive division in, say, 2 to 3 years, especially if Brady retires. But right now, it's basically the Patriots and then everybody else.
Let's start with the Patriots. And obviously, they made a Super Bowl, which they lost to the Philadelphia Eagles. And what would you say is the biggest question mark on the Patriots that could prevent them from making a return run to the Super Bowl?
I mean, I think there's a couple of things you could look at. You can look at history, and if you look at teams coming off of Super Bowl losses, it's been traditionally tougher for those teams to get back and make another run at a Super Bowl. I mean, you look at Carolina a couple of years ago. I mean, Atlanta, they had the loss to New England Super Bowl 51. They blow the 25-point lead. They get back to the playoffs, but they lose in the first round to the eventual Super Bowl champion. And so, that's the first thing that they've got to get through. They've got to get through that Super Bowl loss hangover that historically has given teams some trouble. Then you've got to look at a couple of other things. You've got to look at protecting Tom Brady because this offensive line, they did suffer a big hit when they lost Isaiah Wynn, their first pick in this draft. They lose him for the season with an Achilles injury. He wasn't in line to be a starter up front, but they were looking at him to be that swing tackle type guy, perhaps move him into the starting lineup depending on if Marcus Cannon struggles, if Trent Brown struggles. So that's one issue up front. Another issue is Trent Brown. They acquire him in a trade via the San Francisco 49ers, and he's won that left tackle spot to replace Nate Solder, and he's a very big, imposing, physical left tackle, but he has shown at times this preseason that he can get beat by faster edge rusher types, that he can struggle in pass protection at times. The Patriots do a ton of stuff in the quick game where you want your offensive lineman to get guys to the ground, to throw those cut blocks. He's not the most athletic guy, so he sometimes struggles with that. So that's another area of concern. So protecting Tom Brady, a 41-year-old quarterback, that's one concern. And another on the offensive side of the ball is the wide receiver room. Now, I'd imagine the New England's going to go with more multiple running back groups, more multiple running back packages, more multiple tight end packages even. But right now that wide receiver group is thin, and it doesn't help to have Julian Edelman suspended. So those are some issues on the offensive side of the ball. Defensively, you're looking, can this second level be athletic enough? Can they get enough of a pass rush to get after opposing quarterbacks? Those are three questions they've got to figure out. If they don't figure them out, they might really suffer from that Super Bowl loss hangover.
Looking at the secondary, they obviously lost Malcolm Butler in free agency. I don't know if you call it a loss, but the whole Super Bowl thing's still a question mark of why he didn't play. But how are they looking to replace him so far this offseason and preseason?
Yeah, I mean, they're looking at a couple of different things. It looks right now like your two outside starting corners are going to be Stephon Gilmore, who, what they've typically done with their number one corner type is leave him on an island, just trust that he's going to lock down his guy in man coverage. And then on the other side of the field, where you've got probably Eric Rowe, the other starting outside corner now, who was more of a slot guy for this team last year, look to have them rotate safety help to his side of the field, whether it's Daron Harmon or Devin McCourty, based on the strength of the formation. One of those two guys will probably giving him some dedicated safety help. Some questions remain on the inside, on the slot, because you might have thought that they would have Jason McCourty, who they acquired via free agency, on the outside, and they would have left Rowe on the inside. But McCourty seems to be moving into more of a safety type role, reserve safety role for this season. Jason McCourty, that is. And so that leaves Rowe on the outside. So now you've got, whether it's Jonathan Jones, who's been battling injury most of this preseason, or Duke Dawson, who they drafted in the second round out of Florida. One of those two guys is going to have to lock up that slot corner role, which, as we see so many teams use 3 wide receiver packages, that slot corner at times is looked at as a starter for most defenses. And so that's an important role to figure out. They've got to figure that one out. And then after that, you look at what they've done just in assembling their 53-man roster. They put 2 rookies on this team. One, Keon Crossan, who they and another J.C. Jackson, who was an undrafted free agent, two young guys that had their up and down moments throughout the preseason, but both of these guys made this team. And so I'm excited about this group. I think it's going to be a good group, but, whether they can get that guy to fill that, that slot corner role in Duke Dawson or Jonathan Jones, that's going to be a critical question.
You mentioned that they may go with two tight ends, two running backs, and whatnot. And one of the running backs that they did draft this year was Sony Michel. What do you think Sony is going to bring to this team, and how heavily do you think that they'll rely on him?
It's a great question. And when they drafted him, I assumed that their vision for him was to be a 3-down type back, at some point in his rookie season, because obviously he gives you home run hitter ability, carrying the football. But it's what he would do in the pass game. Now, they didn't use him a ton at Georgia as a receiver, but he showed flashes of being able to run crisp routes, sink his hips in and out of breaks, and all the kinds of things you look for. But he was also very, very, very trustworthy in pass protection. And again, remember how we started this segment talking about protecting Tom Brady. You need a back on those third down situations that you can trust picking up a blitz, protecting Brady's blind side if necessary, getting a chip on an edge rusher maybe to help a Trent Brown if he's struggling at that left tackle spot. But he's been battling injuries as well. He missed the entire preseason. And so I think because of that, because of what they ask their running backs to do in the passing game, we're probably going to see more of a limited role for him to start. It might be a situation where you're really seeing a lot of Rex Burkhead, Jeremy Hill, and James White to start the season as they work Michel in and make sure they can trust him on those situations. They can trust him picking up blitzes to protect Tom Brady, because this is a team that, since the Corey Dillon days, for the most part, really goes running back by committee, because they try to get a lot of matchups. When they do go with multiple running back packages, it wouldn't surprise me to see mixtures as well there. You might see James White and Rex Burkhead on the field at the same time. You might see Burkhead and Devlin, their fullback, who they like to do a lot of stuff with. They trust him as a lead blocker. They trust him as a receiver. So they're going to mix and match packages as well. I think eventually this is going to become more of a Sony Michel-based offense. And in reality, the Michel pick might have been a window into life after Tom Brady, because if you're a young quarterback, there's nothing that helps you more, I'd say, than a back that can do it all for you. And so Michel might be perhaps part of the bridge to the post-Tom Brady era.
Mark, going to the post-Tom Brady era, my last question about the Patriots is, how much longer do you really see Brady and Belichick being around the Patriots organization, and do you think that one could potentially outlast the other?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating question to think about. And obviously, from the Wickersham story last year to other books that are coming out right now, talking about the fractures that are beneath the surface of the relationship amongst sort of the big three, Belichick, Brady, and obviously the owner, Robert Kraft. You do wonder if that window of those three here working together is closing, and perhaps closing faster than we think. I mean, you look at, some of the immediate pushback and blowback out of New England and out of Patriots fans when that Wickersham story dropped, for example. I do think that part of that was rooted in the fear that maybe some of this is right, and maybe these guys aren't getting along, and this era is going to end faster than we think. And that's sort of been an under the surface kind of fear for a lot of Patriots fans headed into this season. I mean, until this team gets back on the field winning games, I think people are going to be a little bit uneasy about where they stand. And so as far as the overall question, I think we've got maybe another 2 to 3 years tops. And I think because of Brady being 41 and obviously being the guy on the field, exposing his body to hits and to injuries and things like that, it's probably more likely that we're going to see Belichick still on the sidelines with Brady retired, living down in Brazil, than Brady still out there slinging it while Belichick's the guy, fishing on his boat off the coast of Nantucket. And so I'd imagine that that's probably the way this ends up. And I do think that there's a part of Bill Belichick that wants to prove that I can win Super Bowls, I can win things, I can win titles and division titles and get to the playoffs and make these Super Bowl runs without Tom Brady. And Brady might feel the same way, but time's running out for Brady to make that kind of move, especially if Belichick's still on the sidelines.
It's been such an interesting discussion that's gone on over years of, who really needs the other one. Does Brady need Belichick? Does Belichick need Brady? Is it just the perfect combination of player and coach? What's it to you? Is it the perfect combination, or is it one that really needs the other one to succeed?
I think it's very much the perfect combination of, head coach, quarterback, offensive mind. These guys, you see some videos, some behind the scenes type stuff. There was a great video out years ago where, they were getting ready to play the Ravens, and the two of them were in Belichick's office breaking down Ed Reed and how they were going to try to get him out of position. It was just fascinating to see these two minds because, one's obviously approaching it from a defensive standpoint, the other, the quarterback, coming from an offensive standpoint. I think they just work incredibly well together. And I think it's a situation where people want to say, look, Tom Brady, he's a system quarterback. And my retort to that has always been, look, every quarterback is a system quarterback. Like, obviously there are some quarterbacks that are better suited to run different schemes than others. And I think, Brady could have run a more West Coast system and been fine. Maybe he wasn't as well suited for a downfield passing game as, say, an Aaron Rodgers, but that doesn't mean that he's, purely a product of the system. I think in some sense, Brady's traits, such as the quick decision-making, the footwork in the pocket, they've allowed New England to do some things schematically that you wouldn't be able to do with other quarterbacks. And so, putting it all together, I think it's just a very good marriage of head coach, of quarterback, of two guys that clearly are a little bit crazy in the head because you kind of have to be to get to this level and to have this kind of a success. And it's just worked incredibly well for them. And maybe more than anything else, that's what's enabled them to work through all of this, whether it's true or not, this away from the field drama that seems to be obviously permeating throughout Foxborough over the past couple of years because the fact that they work so well together and they just keep winning games.
Let's move on to the New York Jets. They were an interesting team in the offseason. They already had Josh McCown in place, but they signed Teddy Bridgewater to a free agent contract, and then they traded up to third in the draft and didn't know which quarterback was going to be there, but they ultimately took Sam Darnold. Well, now they just shipped out Teddy Bridgewater to the New Orleans Saints for a third-round pick. Mark, do you think the Jets did the right thing by trading away Teddy Bridgewater now and what seems to be like they're going to go with Sam Darnold right from the set, or do you think they should have let Darnold sit behind Bridgewater until he was ready?
It's a great question because when you're evaluating these rookie quarterbacks or these soon-to-be rookie quarterbacks, say, into the summer, then into the fall, and then into the winter, and as they get closer to their draft, one of the things that's always lingering in the back of your mind is how quickly should this guy get on the field? And I know that there are two distinct schools of thought. Some people are more old school. You got to sit a guy. Others say, look, the only way to learn is by doing. You got to get him out there. And I think you can have different answers for different guys. And I think with Darnold, you watch him and you see the mentality in him. You see the competitive toughness in him. You see that sort of gunslinger aspect to the way he makes plays on the field, and he's willing to challenge some windows that other quarterbacks might have shied away from. I think the plan to get him on the field makes a ton of sense, even though, look, when he starts week one, he will set a record for being the youngest quarterback to start in the NFL history. I mean, younger than, Drew Bledsoe when he started, younger than Matthew Stafford when he started. And so he's going to be young. There will be mistakes, and he still has things that he needs to work out. But I think from the mental aspect, from the toughness aspect, the competitive toughness aspect that he brings to the quarterback position, I think he's somebody that even when he makes those mistakes, he's going to be able to work through them. It's in stark contrast to, I believe, another guy that we're going to talk about in a few minutes in this division who might be better suited waiting. I think with Darnold, it makes sense. And as far as trading Bridgewater now, one thing to remember is this. It's that we've heard it all summer long. We're going to hear this drumbeat more, although you guys are lucky. You probably don't have to worry about it too much this year. At least I hope for your sake you don't. But the next rookie class of quarterbacks, right now people aren't really sold on it right now. There's obviously a long way to go before we start really evaluating these guys. And I think there are some potential first-round types in there. But from everything I've heard, everything I've been told, the NFL is just really wary of this group. So as far as trading Bridgewater, there was a chance that Bridgewater might have been a more attractive option, say, in November, December. Once we get more film on this next group of guys, if NFL GMs were really scared off, they might have thought, look, we got to grab somebody now for next year because we can't rely on the next group. So there was the potential for that. But I think the Jets looked at it from a different angle. While they might have been able to get maybe a second, or if that next group really looks bad, even better pick in return for Bridgewater, then you open up the fact if Sam Darnold struggles, do you go to Bridgewater? You've got Bridgewater lingering. You've got Bridgewater coming off a good preseason. So I think they looked at it and they said it's much better for the overall development of Sam Darnold if we get Bridgewater, get what we can for him now so he doesn't have that lingering over his shoulder. Because unless Darnold really struggles, there aren't going to be a lot of people clamoring for Josh McCown to go in to replace him. And they might have to do that. I mean, if Darnold struggles, you don't want to ruin him. You might want to get him out of a game if he continues to make mistakes, and you could put McCown in, but it's not really going to get the fan base riled up for a long-term replacement while Darnold sits. And so I think the more important thing to consider for the Jets was to how best develop Sam Darnold. And if that meant trading Bridgewater now, then it makes sense for them.
See, I thought that they were going to have pretty much the exact same, or that their mentality was going to be the same as the Browns. You know, they would start Teddy Bridgewater, much like the Browns are starting Taylor. They would let McCown mentor Darnold, like Stan is with Baker Mayfield, and then when the time is right, you start Baker and you start Sam Darnold.
Yeah, I mean, and that would have made sense to me as well. I think if you sort of look at, you know, how Darnold has evolved just in the short preseason, you know, slate of games we've seen from him, and the offense that they're going to be running, and how it meshed with what he does well already as a quarterback, I think Darnold is ahead of where a lot of people, perhaps even the Jets, expected him to be. I mean, you look at some of the decisions, some of the quick reads, some of the process and speed type plays that he's shown in that Jeremy Bates, you know, offshoot of the Gruden, you know, West Coast type offense. He's shown that quick decision-making that you need to run that offense that's ahead of where a lot of rookies are when they come into the league. And so I think this is one of those situations where Darnold kind of forced their hand. You know, they may have come in, Anthony, you know, expecting to implement that kind of transitional plan where they're going to start Bridgewater, provided he shows he can still play. They'll leave Darnold on the sideline, let him learn, let him be mentored and things like that. But Darnold came in and just blew the doors off of it and just impressed them to a level where they felt comfortable enough that, look, he's going to make mistakes, sure, but he's ready enough to get him out onto the field, and we're not worried about destroying him if he starts week one and has some struggles. And so, great. You know, we had a backup plan just in case. We had a backup plan for a backup plan, basically. They were like NASA. They were doubling down on everything to make sure that, you know, they didn't have an absolute catastrophic failure. And once Darnold showed that he was ready, okay, let's roll with them and see where it goes.
Let's move to the other team in the division that added a quarterback in the draft, and that's the Buffalo Bills. Obviously, they had Nathan Peterman there. They added A.J. McCarron in free agency, who has now been traded to Oakland, and they moved up to draft Josh Allen. Mark, if you were running the Bills, would you start the season with Nathan Peterman and hope that Josh Allen gets to sit and learn for the year? Or do you think, which it seems like it's going to happen, that Josh Allen's going to be thrown out there week one? I wouldn't do it personally. I think it's going to break his confidence playing behind that terrible offensive line and the lack of skill players around him besides LaShawn McCoy.
Yeah, Jack, I'm right there with you. And that's the approach that I would take because, you know, similar to what we were just talking about with the Jets. I mean, when you move up, when you trade up, you get up in the first round to get your guy at 7 in Josh Allen, you know, you've got to look at it from a long-term perspective. You've got to play the long game here. You've got to make what is the best decision for his development at the quarterback position. And from where I sit, you look at how he's played so far. And he's shown some moments. He's shown some flashes. Obviously, the arm is as advertised. The athleticism, I think, might even be better than we thought. You know, you see him outrunning guys to the edge and things like that. So he does have some traits to fall back on for whenever he gets into the game. Like the arm might bail him out of some situations. The athleticism might bail him out of some situations. But the bigger concern is you don't, like you said, want to break his confidence. You don't, like you said, want to ruin the kid. And when you look at the overall roster in Buffalo, you look at who they have, you know, running out there on an offensive line. I mean, I'm looking at names that, look, I watch a lot of football, and I don't recognize a lot of these names that are going to be guys up front for them. You look at throwing at guys like Kelvin Benjamin and Andre Holmes and Jeremy Curley, some question marks there. Zay Jones, we hope that he's back from a mental standpoint given what happened this offseason, but still, there's not a lot here to draw on. And obviously, you're going to see a lot of stacked boxes expecting the running game. So whoever is going to be taking snaps for this team, the pressure is going to be on them to make plays in the passing game. And so I think you put all of this together, And it makes so much more sense for Buffalo to ease Allen in. I'm not saying sit him the entire year. I mean, just, get him on the field at some point. Yeah, but if you put him out there week 1, I am just worried because in contrast to some of the other guys, whether it's Mayfield and his competitive toughness, whether it's Darnold and what we were just talking about, Allen's one of those guys that I think is a little bit more susceptible to perhaps get it into those situations where he makes some mistakes, it turns into quicksand, he starts losing his confidence. And behind this offensive line, you might be looking at a David Carr, version 2.0, where he's taken a ton of sacks, and we saw what it did to David Carr, and not that they're the same person, but that takes its toll on a young quarterback. And so for the long-term investment that you've made in this guy, you've got to handle it the right way. And if it were me, I'm with you. I run Peterman out there week 1. Maybe you bring him in some point along the season, week 8, week 10, whenever, but I wouldn't start him week 1.
I think many of us Browns fans are very thankful for Sashi and not trading for A.J. McCarron. Was that just a thing that was doomed from the start, or did the Bills really not expect him to be that bad this preseason?
I mean, I think they did something similar to what we saw with the Jets. They had a guy in on the organization, in Nathan Peterman, that they kind of knew what they had in him, but they weren't quite sure. They wanted a plan B, a backup plan for that. And they knew that, look, if we were going to have Josh Allen, maybe he's not going to be ready. Maybe it's a situation where he needs to be QB3 for a while. And we're going to need 2 guys anyway. And so they looked at it and said, look, we got to get another guy in. They went with A.J. McCarron. It didn't quite pan out, or maybe it panned out to the point with Allen where they thought Allen can at least be QB2 for us. We don't need to have McCarron in here so they can move on from him. But, it's similar to the Jets. I think the Jets obviously handled it better and, got the better player between Bridgewater and McCarron. But I think both teams had a similar sort of game plan in how they were going to construct their quarterback room this preseason headed into the regular season.
I think we're 2 years into the Sean McDermott era in Buffalo. Do you think he's building the culture there the right way? I know there's been a lot of roster turnover during his time there. Do you think that the way him and the front office are building this team the right way, do you think it's a formula for success, or is it still to be determined?
I think if they're doing it the right way, I think if you look at some of the other picks that they made, I mean, the Tremaine Edmonds pick, I think, was a fantastic pick for them. A young middle linebacker to sort of be the anchor on the defensive side of the ball for years to come. There is a roadmap here for the Bills to get back to a very competitive state because you can build with that defense. You get in some pieces next year up front. You get another good season out of LaShawn McCoy. I mean, you could see a scenario where next year they're in that sort of Jacksonville type mold where, you're not putting a ton on Josh Allen's shoulders, but you're winning with defense, you're winning with the running game, and you get what you can out of Allen from an athletic standpoint, from a vertical passing game standpoint. And so I think in terms of building the overall culture, McDermott's on his way. And let's not forget, look, getting Buffalo to the playoffs, even though they did nothing once they get in there. I mean, they kicked a couple of field goals and they were out. That's a huge thing for this organization. That's a huge thing for that fan base because it's going to get McDermott a couple of years of breathing room now as they transition to this Josh Allen era, which I think we can all agree is going to take some time. I mean, you look at this roster from top to bottom. Yeah, there are some nice pieces here, but it's a year or two away from being competitive, and people rightly so, I think, are looking at this team as probably one of the teams that's, going to finish in the bottom of their division. So that being said, having that playoff berth under them, get into the playoffs for the first time in decades, energizing that fan base, bringing in 2 young guys, one on each side of the ball, and Allen and Edmonds. I think these are all steps in the right move to be a more consistently competitive team 2-3 years down the road.
Let's move on to the last team in AFC East, and that is the Miami Dolphins. This is year 3 of Adam Gase as a head coach of the Dolphins. Do you see this potentially being his last year? Is he on the hot seat there in Miami?
I think the seat is pretty warm. Now he's had some injury things to deal with, obviously, with Tannehill. And I think, if I were, the owner of the Miami Dolphins, I would sort of have the understanding that, look, you're in the same division as New England. You got to be competitive with those guys. I understand. We all want to win games here. I get that. But I do think you need to have some sort of patience and play the little long game here because we all know that Brady window is closing. And there looks to be a changing of the guard where perhaps New England's going to have a couple of down seasons. And so if it were me, I would, give Gase another, 2 years to sort of figure this out. And, if you have 2 bad years in a row here, then yeah, maybe you move on. But that's me. I think NFL owners, for the most part, in this current era, in this day and age where everything happens on a 24-hour news cycle and there's this constant drumbeat of pressure to win now, organizations might want to move on quicker than we would in the past. And so for those reasons, I think there is some pressure on Gase to maybe not get to the playoffs this year or get back to the playoffs this year, but to at least be competitive in this division, to at least be in wild card contention, because that's going to show you, look, we're still trending in the right direction. And so that's kind of where I think it's going, but I think the seat is a little bit warm.
Is this a make or break year for Ryan Tannehill? Obviously, I think this is year 6, year 7 for him. I mean, he's been a little lackluster being the 8th pick in the draft. He has had some flashes, and clearly they were hinting at potentially taking a quarterback in the draft. And obviously his predecessor isn't behind him right now, as David Fales and Brock Osweiler are his backups.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're getting into sort of a situation where, they've got to figure out what they're going to do with him, because look, he just did restructure in March, so they've got a little extension. He's basically under contract through 2020, but his base salary this year is just under $800,000 under the restructure, and so his cap number this year is just $8.6 million. That jumps to $26 million next year and $25 million the year after that. So they're going to have some decisions to make. I mean, just looking at it overall, right now his salary cap is just 4.9% of Miami's entire salary cap. Next year it's 14%. And so, look, that's a quarterback at 31, taking up 14% of your cap for a cap number of $26 million. Those are big numbers. I mean, those are, look at Kirk Cousins, Jimmy Garoppolo. Those are those types of numbers. And so you're going to want to get a return on that. And so for these reasons, I think Tannehill has to have a solid year, because if not, the Dolphins are probably going to think about moving in a different direction, because those are big numbers to be talking about for a 31-year-old quarterback that's had a bit of an up and down start to his NFL career. I mean, let's not forget, came into the league a little bit older. I mean, he 27, I think, in his rookie year. And so, we're talking about a guy that's getting into his 30s now. You expect to see better production from him. Maybe we haven't seen it to the level we'd like if you're a Dolphins fan, and now the numbers and the dollar signs are going to get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Before we let you get on out of here, we haven't had you on since before the draft. So since you're back on with us, obviously the Browns took Baker Mayfield number 1 overall. Do you think that was the right choice for the Browns in taking Baker?
I do. And I think, similar to what we've talked about, in the vein of a culture change, I think that process is underway in Cleveland. I think, the additions of guys like Jarvis Landry and Tyrod Taylor, who are, leader type guys in a locker room. Obviously another year with Myles Garrett, you can see that they're starting to build something in Cleveland, and maybe they're still a year or two away from being competitive or anything like that, but there's definitely a change underway. And so you get a quarterback that kind of personifies all of that, sort of the scrappy underdog, the guy that's always been a walk-on in every single room he's walked into, even when he was the first overall pick, because that's Baker Mayfield. He will always consider himself a walk-on. He will always be the guy that all these colleges passed on. And I'm sure if you sat him, pulled him aside and asked him about the other NFL teams, he was probably still upset that, they all, didn't trade up to number 1 to go get him. He's probably mad at the Browns a little bit because they didn't draft him fast enough when they were on the clock. And so he's got that chip on his shoulder that I think sort of fits this overall, mentality that they're putting together here in Cleveland. So I think it makes a ton of sense, from seeing him perform this offseason. You're seeing, the things that he brings to the table from a trait-based perspective, where it's the toughness in the pocket, moving around in the pocket, extending plays with his legs, but keeping his eyes downfield. And it's probably no surprise to anyone that his first touchdown pass, to David Njoku, it came on an air raid type concept with a mesh concept with a post route over the top of that from the tight end into Njoku. And he went through the progressions perfectly, found Njoku, good throw, great catch, touchdown. It's starting to come together. They've got Tyrod to ease the transition in. But I think Cleveland's, I do think Cleveland's going to win more games right now than people are expecting this year. And then once they turn it over to Baker, I think this team might take off.
Before we let you get out of here, there's obviously we're going to ask you for your predictions for this division. I think we're all in agreement the Patriots are going to win it, so you can debate how 2, 3, and 4 are going to shake out.
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at New England as probably the best team in the division, and barring some sort of injury to Tom Brady or some sort of catastrophic fallout in Foxborough, this is a team that is going to be in contention again for the AFC another year in a row here. And, having 2 games against Buffalo, 2 games against the Jets, 2 games against Miami, that's certainly going to help. I think most people are looking at New England as having another 11-5, 12-4 type year. I think Miami is probably the next best team in this division. When you look at them from what they've assembled around Tannehill, some of the guys on the defensive side of the ball, getting McMillan back, I think is big for them. That's a team that probably wins 8, 9 games. Maybe they're in wild card contention until, Christmas time or so. But then after that, I think you're looking at the Jets and then the Bills. The Bills are probably a 4 or 5 win team. The Jets probably a 5 or 6 win team as they both transition to, rookie quarterbacks, if not in week 1 at some point throughout this season. So this is, again, like we said at the start, a weaker division, a down year for this division. 2 years down the road, it might look completely different if Darnold and or Allen, pan out. It might look completely different, but for right now, I think that's how I'd look at the AFC East coming into the season.
All right, Mark, we appreciate you coming back on with us again. Can you tell everybody how they can check out all of your work? I know, like I mentioned before, Mark was on with us before the draft, and he had a fantastic draft guide that he was nice enough to share with us. So hopefully, I would imagine the work begins soon on next year's draft guide, right? Darn it. Did any of that come through? Probably not. All right, Mark. I appreciate you joining us. We had you on before the draft, and he had a draft guide that he shared with all of us. So can you let everyone know how they could check out your work? And I would imagine the start of the next draft guide starts here soon, right?
Yeah, that process is already underway. And thanks again, guys, for having me back. It was great to be with you. Best way to find me, at Mark Schofield on Twitter. You can check out the work in places like InsideThePylon.com, Pro Football Weekly, The Score, Locked On Patriots, Matt Waldman's Rookie Scout and Portfolio, Big Blue View, part of the SB Nation Network, covering the Giants. I've done pieces for Steelers Depot and even the Minnesota Rivals, part of the Rivals Network, covering the Minnesota Golden Gophers. But easiest place to find me, at Mark Schofield on Twitter. And guys, thanks so much for having me on. Keep crushing it.
Awesome, Mark. I appreciate it. There's a long pause because I kind of forgot to hit the unmute button.
No worries.
Before I said anything, I've done that a couple times tonight. I kind of out of it, but I appreciate you coming on.
You guys are grinding, man.
Oh yeah, we're grinding. So we appreciate you coming on, and hopefully we'll talk to you again soon. All right.
Sounds great, guys.
All right. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
All right. See you guys.
That was our interview with Mark Schofield of Inside the Pylon, and joining us next will be Michael Kist. He is the host of the Bleeding Green Radio Podcast, and here we go. It is our honor now to be joined by Michael Kist. He is the producer / host of the Bleeding Green Nation podcast. He also is a writer over at Bleeding Green and Inside the Pylon. How are you doing today, Michael?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to this.
Of course. The way we're doing this is we seem to be having the winners of every division. We're getting a guy who covers the Eagles or the Packers that we had on, and we want to get you in here to help us preview the NFC East. And as we start to do that, what is your overall viewpoint of how the NFC East is going to shake out? You have the defending Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles in there. You also have the New York Giants and Dallas Cowboys along with the Redskins. How do you see this division shaking out, and what would you say is the biggest storyline of the division as the season starts here?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest storyline would have to be how the Philadelphia Eagles come out the gate. Because I am a little bit concerned that they might come out a little bit slow, and that would open the door for some of the other contenders who I consider to be either shaky or just bad, and we'll get into those reasons in a little bit. But I mean, the Philadelphia Eagles have Carson Wentz, who isn't starting week 1. Nick Foles will be starting. He's coming back from an injury. They need guys like Jason Peters back healthy, Jordan Hicks back healthy. They didn't have those guys last year. Darren Sproles, same thing. But there is also a lot of guys like Alshon Jeffrey, who played through a torn rotator cuff, who is coming back, and he needs to stay healthy. You've got Brandon Graham, who is still dealing with the ankle injury from that he suffered in the postseason. Matt Collins has a knock. Derek Barnett had offseason sports hernia surgery. Timmy Jernigan, who knows when he's going to be back. He had that back injury in the offseason. To get those guys back at some point and get them at full health and have them be at full health is going to be big for this team. And I would not be surprised if this team starts slow and maybe drops one to the Atlanta Falcons. But, they've actually got some gifts coming up after that with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Indianapolis Colts on the schedule after that. I see those as wins, so they might be able to survive those early struggles. If they drop two of those three, then they might be there might be some concern, and then that door is wide open for the rest of the NFC East teams, in my opinion.
Go ahead. Go ahead, man.
Obviously, the biggest story is Carson Wentz. It's terrible, that injury he suffered right before the playoffs. That was roughly 10 months ago that he suffered that injury. He's done a tremendous job, it seems, of coming back from that rehab. He should be ready here soon. It's kind of unfortunate that he's not the quarterback of the Cleveland Browns, but that's another story for a different time. When do you expect him to be ready? And when he is ready, how much do you expect him to come back to that MVP caliber season that he was having last year before he got hurt?
Yeah, I mean, Peter King has said that he expects him to come back under favorable conditions with a home game against the Indianapolis Colts. I don't see any difference between week 2 to week 3. You get the 10 days between week 1 and week 2, which is nice. However, at this point, after that, you're just making incremental changes to the percentage in which he can re-injure that ACL and all that. So I could see him coming back week 2. I think the target date was week 1. They didn't quite reach it. Maybe it's hopefully it's not a mental thing. That would be bad news. But he's looked great. He's moved around. He's doing drills before the games, and he looks loose. And there are points where you can't tell that he had an injury. And then there are some points where you can tell there might be a little bit of a false step in the weight transfer and whatnot. But I could see him, because he had a crazy touchdown rate last year, and it put him at league leading in the league in touchdowns. I don't see him being that bonkers with the touchdown rate, where he had 33 touchdowns in 13 games. However, I don't see him. I think the over-under right now on him is 27 touchdowns. I can very well see him being over that. What limits his game right now is how mobile is he, how comfortable is he being mobile, because that's where a lot of his big splash plays come from, is extending the play and then finding someone downfield. That still remains to be seen. That's going to be part of his game. I think they bring the offense in a little bit more and lower that average depth of target for him. So you might see some drop off there, but they're so doggone good in the red zone that he's gonna rack up things that the voters care about, and that's touchdowns for me.
When you talked about some of the injuries on the defensive side for the Eagles, but they brought in Haloti Ngata and they also brought in Michael Bennett in the offseason. We've seen how dominant that Eagles defense was on their run to the Super Bowl. Do you think they got stronger with those additions this offseason?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty good swap right now as far as Michael Bennett filling in for a lot of the Timmy Jernigan snaps, and you bring in Haloti Ngata as well to strengthen the run defense. And he even had a sack in the preseason where he hit a nice spin move. But I don't see it as a drop-off. They definitely got stronger, I feel like, as a pass rushing unit. You've got Derek Barnett coming into his second year as well. It'll be just interesting to see how he develops. But I think that defense as a whole, and remember, they've got real young corners, and those corners starting on the outside, Jalen Mills, Ronald Darby, and then you got Sidney Jones coming off basically a redshirt season into the nickel. I really think that that's something that they can work with there. If one of those guys takes a serious step forward, I mean, Ronald Darby in his rookie season showed like he Pro Bowl potential. Sidney Jones was a top 15 pick for a lot of people coming out into the draft, and I think he's fully recovered from that Achilles injury. And Jalen Mills is having the camp of his life from what I understand from the beat writers there. So that secondary steps up, and then you add Michael Bennett, like you said, into the mix, and you add Haloti Ngata for depth, so you can keep those guys from taking 65% of the snaps on that defensive line, which nobody on the defensive line for the Eagles went over 65% of the snaps, and you just let them pin their ears back and be fresh. I think they can be dominant once again.
The answer to this next question might be health. But what do you see as the biggest weakness for the Eagles in trying to defend their Super Bowl title?
Geez, yeah. I mean, the hangover question is always out there, and it's definitely something that they think about a lot. And they really try to push the competition there. And one thing they did do was take down the Super Bowl championship banners that they had up in the locker room to try to avoid that hangover. But, the rehab club there in Philadelphia is a real thing. Carson Wentz wasn't on the field when they won a Super Bowl. Neither was, any of the guys that I mentioned before, especially like guys like Jason Peters and whatnot. So you worry about it, but then you also know there's a core group of guys there that are extremely hungry. So, yeah, like I mentioned before, it's getting healthy to start the season with the guys that have been banged up leading up to this process, and then staying healthy throughout the rest of the process. It's very rare that you get a team like the Eagles last year that took as many hits as they did and still continue to win like they did. They were playing Russian roulette in the playoffs except for the NFC Championship game, but the Atlanta Falcons, New England game, those could have gone either way for sure.
We'll move now to the Dallas Cowboys, and I look at them as a team that's right now at the bottom of this division, and it's crazy to think when you see some of the players that they have. Dak Prescott and Ezekiel Elliott. When you look at the Cowboys, Michael, you think Dak will be able to bounce back from what looked like a bad season for him last year and maybe see glimpses of what we've seen out of him his rookie season?
Yeah, I think he's got the talent to do it. I don't know if he has the mental toughness and the competitive toughness to do it. And that's what we really need to see is him bounce back from struggling, which we didn't see during the season last year. He had a very, very rough stretch after Tyron Smith went down. And, I'm not going to blame that Atlanta Falcons game on him where he got sacked 8 times. That wouldn't be fair. But there were other games where he looked terrible as well. What's really limiting him there is where are the weapons? Because at tight end, you have Jeff Swain, and then you've got Allen Hurns, Cole Beasley, Terrence Williams. Like they're what they're putting around him to throw to as a rookie on a rookie contract is shameful in my opinion, and you're losing that window that you have where you can go really attack a Super Bowl with the way that you dole out your contracts because of mismanagement in the past 2 years and all the dead money that they've had to deal with to go along with that. So Dak may take a step forward, and it really may not show up in the stat sheet because of the weapons around him.
There was a ton of drama last season with Ezekiel Elliott and whether or not he was going to be suspended and that whole nonsense that went on with all of that. If he can return to form, well, this is kind of a two-part here. Do you think he can return to form? And if he can return to form, how does that impact with what Dak is going to be able to do as well?
Yeah, I mean, he absolutely can return to form, and you saw him kind of come on a little bit. I felt like when he came back, he wasn't really – I thought he thought that he wasn't going to be available for the first game, and he was a bit out of shape. He didn't have the same burst that he typically has. I've watched him a lot, and it just seems like he was just a tick slower, and you could tell he was a little bit puffier, had a little extra weight on him. I think also with the distraction not around him that he had last offseason is going to be huge for him. So I do think that he plays a lot better out the gate this year, and that will be important for the Cowboys offense. However, without a passing game, to be solely reliant on him and then without a dominant defense and without the weapons around him that maybe they had before that were younger, like Des Bryant and Witten were younger in those years, I still think you might not see the needle move much as far as the overall offensive production. And you take into account that Travis Frederick is dealing with that autoimmune disease, which is extremely unfortunate. You never want to see that happen to anybody. And you've got Joe Looney starting in his place. And then at left guard, you've got the rookie Connor Williams, who I really liked out of Texas coming out, but he's got some strength issues. I think they could struggle to create the same type of movement and the same type of holes that they've created in the past for him. And then if Tyron Smith goes down, and he's been beat up for the last year and a half, if he's out for any period of time, that offense is going to fold in upon itself.
That's what I was going to, you bringing up Frederick, that's what I was going to bring up next. But, when you talk about the Cowboys' weaknesses, obviously, Frederick going down does kind of shake up the offensive line a little bit. And you did mention Tyron Smith, him being injured as well. Do you any other weaknesses that you look at when you look at this Cowboys roster?
Yeah, I mean, you look around and the pass rush, other than DeMarcus Lawrence, isn't too enticing. And I'm not sure if the news has dropped yet about Randy Gregory and what's going on with him. He's their nickel pass rush specialist, but I think Jason Luck-and-Forest said that he was there were some clouds looming as far as that went. So them just getting a consistent pass rush on the other side of DeMarcus Lawrence, I think would be their other one. They've got some young guys. Taco Charlton showed a little bit of improvement last year. I still think he's another year away. They drafted Dorrance Armstrong out of Kansas. We'll see what he's able to provide. But getting that secondary guy to be able to provide that pass rush, and then on the inside of their defense, man, I think they're a little bit soft. But so I would say it's along the defensive line outside of D-Law, who had an amazing season last year. And often you see these guys blow up with these big sack numbers, and not all of them are like earned the right way. Some of them are unblocked and whatnot. DeMarcus Lawrence put on absolute clinics all year, so he's the strength, and then around him would be the weakness.
In New York, there was a massive changeover in the firing of Ben McAdoo. They brought in Pat Shurmur, who both you and us here in Cleveland are very familiar with. Yeah. They drafted Saquon Barkley. They signed Nate Solder and Will Hernandez. How do you think the facelift on offense is going to change things from that horrible offense that they had last year? Is it going to propel them to have something somewhat decent this year?
Yeah, I think it'll look better. I mean, you're just going to look better by proxy of bringing in Odell Beckham Jr. on that deal. But when you look at their line, like Nate Solder had this gigantic contract because that's what's going on with the left tackle market right now. But he's an average left tackle, and he has only been average for the last few years. Will Hernandez is nice. I loved him in the draft, and I had a fringe first-round grade on him. I saw him live in Mobile, Alabama for the Senior Bowl. He was the biggest human being I've ever seen when he walked out on that stage for the weigh-ins, and he's nasty, and he's going to bring something to that team. The question is he polished enough to make it that big of a difference? And then you look at center, right guard, and then right tackle Eric Flowers is going to have to deal with some seriously premier defensive pass rushers throughout the year. And that's where you really get concerned. So I think that offensive line is, on the whole, bad, like really bad, even though they worked to try to get it up to an acceptable level. I don't think it is yet. And I think you're still going to see the quick throws from Eli Manning, which limits the explosive plays that you can create on offense. You're pretty much depending on Odell to create after the catch. And I do like their weapons with Evan Ingram and Sterling Shepard is nice, but you just drafting Barkley, and that's great. But if they want to be a run-first team, I don't think that's the way to go when that defense, in my opinion, is one injury away from being just a gigantic catastrophic failure, and maybe anyway.
You talked about how poor the offensive line is. Eli Manning's entering his 15th season. How much time do you think he has left on his NFL career? And playing behind a poor offensive line, you would think that time is ticking with him. Yeah,
I mean, I really, really, really was pounding the table for them not to take a running back at 2, not because I'm an Eagles fan, just from a football perspective, doing the smart thing and building a roster. I mean, they just released Davis Webb, their third-round quarterback, and now they've got Kyle Aletta sitting behind him. But I don't think Eli has much left. I thought they should have gone a quarterback at 2 and really went to rebuild. And it's my understanding that when they brought in Dave Gettleman, they told him, like, look, we're keeping Eli. You have to build around him. So get an offensive line, get a running back, and kind of patch this thing together. They don't have the defense to make us to make a run like that, and they're gonna have to score a bunch of points. And they're just I feel like they're not going to be able to keep pace, and that's not Eli Manning's game anymore. I know they opened the offense up for him. I believe it was week 3 against the New York Jets, and it looked fine there. I think it looks a lot worse come the regular season.
What impact do you think Pat Shurmur is going to have as his second stint as a head coach? Obviously, his first one didn't go too well here in Cleveland. With him being a very good offensive coordinator, you think he's going to be able to translate that the second time around to being a head coach?
I don't think it really matters. I think this offense is constructed around Eli Manning and has been for years. I mean, if you remember, Eli Manning wanted Ben McAdoo for the job because he could keep the offense the way he wanted it. That's the offense that Eli Manning is comfortable in. Shermer's an okay coach. He wasn't able to influence Chip Kelly enough in Philadelphia and hasn't done much for me outside of that. He's not really inspiring to me. And I think ultimately that the offense pretty much on a fundamental level looks the same to me just from a schematic standpoint.
Do you think he's going to be able to handle the New York media? I know when he was here in Cleveland, he had a tough time with our media, and I don't know what he was like in Philly. And I would imagine the Philly media is not too light on coaches. So do you think he'll be able to control himself?
Oh, it's all sunshine and gun drops, especially back then with the Philly media. Now, but Shermer, you wonder if the guy has like learned the lessons of that, or if he's just not capable of relating to the media on that level. And in New York, that's a bit of a big deal. I think once you hit to midseason, and dude, I mean, if you look at the New York Giants schedule for the first 8 games, I don't know if they win 2 games. And if you get to that point, I think that when you get some heat on him, then you're really going to see if he's learned any lessons and can push past it, because I'm not convinced either way, and I'm probably leaning to the fact that he's probably gonna fold.
The Washington Redskins, you can say their biggest transaction over the offseason was letting Kirk Cousins go, and they brought in Alex Smith via trade. Do you see Alex Smith as a potential upgrade over Kirk Cousins with what they gave up to get him, and then they did sign him to that contract extension as well?
Yeah, so Alex Smith has been kind of Jekyll and Hyde. I think for 11 years of his career, he was a lot of checkdowns and protect the ball and play really well, have a high completion percentage and be an efficient quarterback, but lacking the explosive plays. Last year, he blew the doors off that because he had Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce to throw the ball to. I think the situation is very different in Washington, and I think we see him regress back to the quarterback that he typically is, which is still a very good quarterback, but nothing that's going to wow you. Kirk Cousins, on the other hand, was very up and down. He can get you to the red zone and be 6th in big time throws, and then also be 7th in turnover worthy throws. And that's kind of like all throughout his stats. He's very, very high variance. He's going to get you a lot of touchdowns, going to get you a lot of interceptions, going to try to make a lot of big throws. There's going to be mistakes in there. Alex Smith is very different in that regard. My concern with that is he doesn't have the weapons that he had in Kansas City, and then you also lose Darius Geis for the season to get that run game going, and he's going to have to do it all on his own, and he's never really been capable of that.
Yeah, when you talk about the weapons, obviously Jamison Crowder, Jordan Reed, and Josh Doctson were already here in Washington. They brought in Adrian Peterson, they brought in Paul Richardson via free agency. Do you think these weapons will be good enough for Alex Smith, or do you think it's obviously a drop off from what he had in Kansas City, but right. Do you think they are good enough for Alex Smith to be able to perhaps elevate the talent around him?
Jamison Crowder is a very good slot wide receiver, and I know he was a little bit banged up last year, so I don't mind that his production dropped. It's not a referendum on him. I think Alex Smith is going to love him. I think Alex Smith is going to love throwing the ball to Chris Thompson, out of the backfield and, wherever they decide to line him up. My concern is guys like Josh Doctson, who's very good at the catch point, not necessarily going to burn anyone and create those attractive, wide open windows that he got with Tyreek Hill. So I think they have solid players that can make plays. They just don't have like the world-class stuff that he was dealing with in Kansas City. So I think he's going to have a decent year as far as throwing the football around goes. But I just think it's going to look more like the previous 10 to 11 years of his career as opposed to last year in Kansas City, which was a bit of an outlier for me. So they have decent weapons. It's just not anything special to me. And Jordan Reed is finally coming back from a toe injury and is supposed to be available for week 1. We'll see how long that lasts. Him being healthy for the entirety of the season is big for that offense too.
The Redskins spent a lot of draft capital on defense this season. They also signed Zach Brown to a nice free agent contract as well. How do you think this kind of revamped Redskins defense is going to perform?
I really like their defensive line and the capital that they put in there. I thought Deron Payne in the first round, where they took him from Alabama, was a little bit of a reach, but it's still okay. You got Jonathan Allen, Deron Payne, Matt Ioannidis is very underrated as far as the player goes. The linebackers are solid, but I don't think they can cover I mean, I think that's going to be a big bugaboo for them, just like it's going to be for the Giants. I don't know if they can cover tight ends or running backs out of the backfield. And I don't know who's playing nickel cornerback for them. They don't have a guy on that roster that last year that I think played, and I don't have the numbers right on me, I'm going off the top of my head, but I think the most that they had was 17 snaps from somebody playing in the nickel since they traded Kyle Fuller. So sussing that out in a league where you're going to have to face, guys like Sterling Shepard and Nelson Aguilar and other guys that, like Philly likes to move their tight ends around in the slot and whatnot. I think that's going to be big for them. Otherwise, I like what they're doing up front. I think their front is good. I think that if they have better injury luck this season, then, they'll have a pretty good defense on their hands.
Go ahead.
Well, just to follow up on that, do you think they're watching Philly and how they're building their defense and they're trying to copy it? I mean, it seems like that's a trend around the league. When one team does it, everybody else tries to. Do you think the Redskins are trying to do just that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they have similar styles necessarily, but that's hard because if they wanted what Philly has, I don't know if Deron Payne is the type of guy that they're looking for. And Jonathan Allen is kind of different too. So their fronts are a little bit different. And I think their linebackers, they put a bigger focus in Philadelphia on coverage with Nigel Bradham. And it looks like Kamuga Hill is going to be another starter. And he's very athletic and very good in coverage. So if they are trying to copy Philadelphia, I would say the one major area that they're failing is in their coverage linebackers. I think Philadelphia's got them beat there by a good amount.
Before we let you get out of here, we have to ask your opinion on the whole Michael Kendrick situation.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very interesting. Everyone wanted to trade him forever now. And then last preseason, I think he had a fumble recovery and a pick on like a tip pass or some nonsense like that. And he played okay during the season as well. But, the Eagles don't blitz a lot because they don't have to. They can bring forward and get there. So when you're only blitzing 20% of the time, and, you've got Jordan Hicks coming back and Kendricks is very good at blitzing, but we don't do it enough. Then, we cut him. He gets bitter about it. He says a bunch of stuff that gets out on Hard Knocks. I think a lot of it was kind of taken out of context. I understand his point there. I mean, he made one point about Big V, Halapuli Vativaitai, about how if you get in his head, you can beat him up all game. And that's absolutely true. So he wouldn't necessarily, fibbing, but and then just to have that insider trading thing come out in the next couple of days is like, well, no one's listening to this guy anymore. He's gone. No worries. Like, I don't know if Howie saw that coming or what, but he just seems to have a sense for these types of things. So he may have been tipped off by somebody that he was under investigation. So I'm glad to not have that headache in Philadelphia, basically.
Yeah, we quickly got rid of that headache, even though I thought he was playing well, but unfortunately, they got to get rid of him after something like that.
For sure.
How do you see this division shaking out in terms of the standings this year?
Yeah, I'm still gonna go with the Eagles in the top spot, unless they have that bad slow start that leaks into some of what should be gimme games against guys like I mentioned, like the Colts and the Bucks. I think they get a big enough lead, and I don't see a complete team outside of them in this division. The Dallas Cowboys probably would be second for me and close to another wild card spot, very similar to last year. I think the Redskins can press them. If I were to call anything close and maybe swap them, I would say maybe the Redskins and the Cowboys. And then the Giants, I just think that defense is going to fall apart again. They had the most explosive plays allowed or the second most explosive plays allowed in the NFL last year with that secondary. They're still starting Eli Apple, who's an absolute head case. They have zero pass rush. And Olivier Vernon's dealing with a knock right now is the only thing they have. Their linebackers can't cover. They only have one safety. It's bad on that defense, and they're going to get blown up a lot. And I don't think they can keep pace. So I'll put the Giants in the cellar.
Before we let you get out of here, tell everyone how they can listen to you and read what you do for Bleeding Green and Inside the Pylon.
Yeah, bleedinggreennation.com, also insidethepylon.com. I produce shows for Bleeding Green Nation, so you just put in Bleeding Green Nation on your search for iTunes or Google Play or however you get your podcast. You'll get the feed on there. I have a show of my own with Benjamin Solak called the Kist and Solak Show. I produce another show called Fireside Chats where we bring in great minds from around the football media and even some former players I'm about to talk with to just talk about some general football things as well. So there's a lot of different things for a lot of different tastes, and it's not just for Eagles fans as well. There's tons of content we have coming out there. So follow Bleeding Green Nation Podcast. You can follow them on Twitter at BGN_radio. Follow me on Twitter at Michael Kist NFL.
All right, Michael, I absolutely appreciate you coming on with us, and hopefully we'll talk to you here in the near future. Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I want to thank both Mark and Michael for joining us on this episode of 1085 Gridiron. I absolutely appreciate whenever we have guests on, and both these guys absolutely killed it today, and hopefully you all enjoyed it as well. As always, you can follow the show on Twitter and on Facebook at 1085 Gridiron. You can follow me personally at Anthony Joki, Joki. You can find the podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Play, Spotify, most importantly. Be sure to subscribe, rate, review our podcast. And as we get on out here, I'll leave you with this, as I do at the end of every podcast, and that is, go Browns.